Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. Our guest today is Sharon Itkoff Nacache. Sharon is a perinatal mental health certified art psychotherapist, and Sharon has been supporting caregivers in cultivating creative resilience. And she's based in New York City, and we are really, really excited to have Sharon on the show today because I actually don't know too much about this topic as well. I have done a lot of artwork in my life, and I've, just been a little bit of an artist dabbling in things in my earlier years. And so I love the space that I get into when I'm doing my own artwork. And I always joke around with my husband. He's like, what do you really want to do today? I was like, I want you to leave the house so that I can just paint. How about that? And we'll just joke like that, but it's not a joke, it's real.
I get that.
But I love the concept of the work that you're doing, and I'm so excited for listeners to learn more about it today and learn more about your journey and through all of this as well. So welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And, a lot of people associate art therapy with kids and finger painting, and there's not a lot of common knowledge about what I do. So I'm so grateful for any platform to kind of share it, especially the fact that you and I overlap worlds in supporting, maternal health. So let me tell you a little bit about what I do.
Yes.
So as you mentioned, I'm a perinatal mental health certified art psychotherapist. Really what that means is my primary modality is art therapy. I was trained in Brooklyn at Tottenham Institute 13 years ago, which sounds crazy now. Art therapy is an integrated mental health profession. So we are trained in psychological theory, counseling approaches, and also we have formal art training, which you don't need to also engage in art therapy. But for us, it just helps to add to our toolkit. So we have this whole other layer of connecting with clients who, maybe they're less verbal, maybe there's been a trauma, maybe there's some resistance to talking about something. That's also why kids can be great to work with, because art making is a first language as opposed to actually our verbal language. So it's just another way to kind of access what's going on, and we use all media. My practice is virtual now, so it looks a little different than it did when I had my studio in person, but it's really based on meeting people where they are, what they like to work with. The fact that you like to paint, it would be awesome to see you get going with something, just because it's about sort of fostering your own creative interest, but not necessarily to produce something beautiful and a product to display in a gallery. It's really about externalizing and the process itself and how that makes you feel in the moment. So I think that's it in a nutshell. And then the perinatal mental health focus, that was later on in my journey. I think I had been working for 7 years in the field, and I got pregnant with my first child. I was at a clinic that interestingly closed, just fully closed, the day before my son was born. So if that's not a cosmic sign that something is going to shift, I don't know what is. And from there, along with raising my first child, I realized just the lack of resources, the lack of mental health resources and physical health resources available to progressive, educated, overachieving people like myself. So imagine the rest of the population, or those who do not have access and do not have privilege. So it was really humbling. I was really floored by that adjustment, and the lack of resources, the lack of knowledge I had about how to seek help for different things. And it just fueled this passion around advocating and finding this information and getting trained in it myself, so that, that was part of my healing, that I could really focus my practice once I decided to open it after my second child was born. I really wanted just to devote it to, I say caregivers, but a lot of who I see is people, birthing people, families who are trying to, they're somewhere in the reproductive journey, people who are struggling with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, ambivalence around starting a family, birth trauma. I mean, it's the whole spectrum of reproductive mental health. And then also, it might be older parents who are just really stressed out, or for some folks, they have caregiver burnout. It might be parents, who have older kids who are now taking care of their own parents. So all of that goes into what it means to really give of yourself and be of service, and kind of balance that, I don't know the right word, balance that demand, that tension of really taking care of someone else while also obviously supporting yourself, which I think our society at large struggles with.
And that's where our professions come in to remind people that while you might be all about the baby or all about the children, which it is, that your cup needs to be full too. And so there's lots of tools and strategies and so many different ways you can, address your mental health. And then on my end, the physical health, but then really, they're really one and the same, and they're super combined. So I'm curious what a session looks like. I'd love to just know that so that I can put a visual to,
Sure.
like a frame of reference.
Yeah, it's also a question I get a lot. And, my answer is a little bit abstract because my field is abstract. It really depends on how long I've been working with someone, what their presenting issue is, all of that. But generally speaking, because it's virtual, I think I have a bit of a template, which is really just, I'll do a verbal check-in. I really like to meet people where they are. It's like everybody carves out the 50 minutes, which can be just such an effort in and of itself to just find that space, So I really want to, not everyone wants to jump into childhood stuff right away. It's like, let's see, what are you bringing into the room? And I'll actually do a needs assessment, which I think you will appreciate, which is really about tuning into your body. And, you finally got into this space, and the kid is with the sitter, and you have everything, you're here, but you're frazzled. So I kind of ask people to take a breath, tune in with their bodies, grab a cup of water. They need to run to the bathroom or get a box of tissue. Just sort of like tune into, what do you actually need to feel comfortable in order to be present with me in this space and feel, whole, and like you don't need to be pulled in another direction. So we'll do some kind of check-in, just emotionally, physically, what do you need in this moment? The breathing does wonders. I just do a quick mindfulness, that's a little bit of a paradox, quick and mindful, but it's true. You can be mindful in just a moment, filling your lungs, seeing what that feels like. And then from there, just, diving into the week. And based on that, it depends. I have some clients who really, their defenses are very high. I tend to work with a lot of, very successful, driven. I think this is being in New York too. My practice is New York, New Jersey, but in the Northeast, there's a lot of achievement, a lot of performance, a lot of activity. And so with that comes a lot of stress and often a lot of defenses, right? So I'll find with some of my clients, they could talk the full 50 minutes and just use it as a venting session, and, and just sort of want validation and support. And that's helpful. That is how a lot of therapists work. But I try to insert the mindful art making piece wherever I can. So let's say, there's this story and somebody is getting really caught up in the details and really emotionally heated. And I try to sort of pause, check in with the body, what's going on, and then see if, we'll come back to the details, but what if we can, if I notice patterns or spirals, or people are getting a little bit stuck in it, maybe we can give that form. Like, let's shift the energy a little bit and try to represent, what did it look like when everybody was sitting around the table at Thanksgiving? If everybody had to be a color or a shape or a texture, like just draw that energy. And that's super abstract, but even just taking that 5 minutes to just grab a color pencil and try to imagine it in a different way, it just shifts the whole conversation. And then we have these metaphors that we use that really enhance our the work that we're doing, because suddenly we have all these sharp edges and round edges, and we can actually look at it and talk about it, as opposed to just sort of carving the same narrative that they're already struggling with in their own head and just repeating it back. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's just one example. I'll insert it in. And then I have some clients that have their own creative practices, and they like to do it outside of session as sort of like a response piece. A lot of things might have come up, emotions, a memory. And I think that's actually a really beautiful practice, is just to sort of keep some kind of creative processing happening in between sessions, and then they'll bring it in. And maybe we'll start the session that way and see if there's anything residual that, sat with them a certain way or came up later, and maybe we'll process the artwork a little bit and go from there. So it can be, the spaces in between. It can be actual real-time art making. There's sometimes where I'll actually like, I know most of us can't see me, but I'll tilt my screen so you can actually see me making art with you in real time if I have people who are a little bit self-conscious about it, or, so there's so many ways to do it. And then if I'm running a group, it's a whole other type of structure. And usually it's fragmented a little bit different, but it's the same idea of sort of balancing this verbal processing with a good amount of time of creative visual processing, and then trying to kind of reintegrate it and somehow put it back together in that 50-minute hour. And that's the co-creation process. I mean, that's the name of my practice, because every session looks different. If I'm working with someone for 2 weeks or 2 years, it's just, that's what I love about it. It's never a dull moment, and there's always something new to uncover, because we're constantly creative beings who are always kind of reinventing ourselves.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, during your sessions, I'm thinking of the typical type A Northeast female who's, very driven and kind of matter of fact. If they're not really a visual learner, like not very hands-on and does things like this in general, how do you rope them in? What are the things or tools or strategies that you find have been most effective to get that buy-in? It might be just do it and you'll see the benefit, but what I guess I'm curious what you kind of tend to do.
Yeah, that's also a great question. I actually, that's my favorite person to work with, the one who feels like they are the worst at art making and have like a big aversion to it, or have just no background in it and like can barely find their kids' crayons to bring to session, because I actually find there's no unlearning that has to happen. I think when I work with artists, they have so much baggage around what it's supposed to look like in their training, and it's a lot of stuff to kind of shed to get them in that space to make art. Whereas if you actually have really no baseline, it's a beautiful place to start. So I start with really just playful exercises, things that get you out of your head and are automatically doing something that it's not going to look good. So I preface it. I use a lot of disclaimers. This isn't going to be beautiful. This is going to feel kind of weird. Maybe you're going to use your non-dominant hand. So of course you can't control it. So it's this exercise of letting go of control from the get-go, so that you lower your expectations from the beginning. It can't look good. You're using your left hand and you're right-handed. That's ridiculous. Or maybe you're going to close your eyes for a minute and try something with both hands on the page. So, I have a lot of little fun exercises like that. And then there's something I really like to use called Open Studio Process. And that was developed by Pat Allen in the 70s. She's still practicing. She's based in Chicago. And it's this beautiful format that really combines kind of a journaling with a creative art making piece. And for some people, that's a really nice segue too. Let's start with some intuitive stream of consciousness writing, because that feels much more safe. Mm-hmm. And then from that will kind of fuel the art making. So there's all kinds of ways to do it. But, the main goal is always establishing safety and trust, and making sure that they just feel like whatever comes up in the session is valid and inherently worthy and beautiful and worth looking at.
Yeah, I remember my art teacher sometimes when I was younger, when we were working with a new medium for the first time, she would be like, come in with non-judgmental attitude, because I know you're striving for perfection, but this is something new and we're doing something that's, we haven't done before. And so I think that is probably something that, people have to come to terms with, especially the perfectionists type, that you can't come in just being like, oh, they have to, like you said, create something beautiful. It's not about creating something beautiful, it's creating something that's expressive. And so you can assign a meaning, negative or positive, to it, but that's your choice at the end of the day. But that's really fascinating. So how do you kind of integrate, talking about the art therapy and getting people to do these experiential kind of activities and little things, how do you then kind of tie it together for them to be like, okay, this is what's going on in my mind, this is what I've been creating with my hands, and kind of just integrating that mind-body connection together? What's kind of the process that you like to work with there?
These are all great questions. And you also, by the way, reminded me of a painting professor I had in college. And my favorite quote from him was, "Fear cannot enter this room," which I loved, because I think that's a lot of it too. That it's kind of like the shadow side of perfectionism. There's a lot of fear. How's this going to look? What are people going to think? So anyway, that was just a bit about the last thing. But in terms of kind of fostering that connection, I mean, sublimation is Freud's, one of his big contributions to the field. And, you know, a lot of early art therapists were Freudian followers. I think sublimation, this idea of channeling, is really important. So taking sort of the static and finding a way to channel it to this sort of cathartic, kinesthetic experience, which often is very physical. So that's art as therapy. That's sort of one school. And that is the finger painting, the splatter painting, the scribbling, the adult coloring books, which everyone thinks is art therapy, but isn't exactly, but it's still therapeutic. That's what that is. That's really just getting it, just the pure, raw, primal externalization of that energy. And, you know, the theory goes, if that energy doesn't get expressed, then it gets repressed or turned into some other kind of maladaptive ego defense. That's kind of the old school way of thinking. And that's what people have been doing throughout time. I mean, that's artist therapy. That's that inherently feel good quality of kind of what you were saying, like, just leave the house. I just want to paint. I just want to turn on some music and just like let it flow, right? So there's that. And then I think there's that other layer with working with an art therapist where it's the symbolism and it's that kind of higher level processing that happens through metaphor. So, you know, allowing, for example, in working with pregnant people who I love to work with, because it's all about, there's so much energy and so much emotional buildup during this time, right? You're just waiting for this. You have to be passive. You're supposed to be passive while this being grows in you for 9 months. And like, what are you supposed to do with all that energy? And a lot of that turns into anxiety or somatic complaints, as you know, and that's what you deal with, chronic pain and, you know, obsessive about things that are changing in their bodies and things like that. So I think that by engaging in any art process, especially with a compassionate witness, you're really practicing imperfection. You're practicing letting yourself create something that, again, doesn't have to look good, that you just are, you're kind of respecting what comes from you and fostering that relationship, which I think is really good practice, because parenting is very imperfect. Childbirth is very imperfect. I mean, the whole process is very messy, and I don't think there's enough training or preparation in our culture for what that's going to look like beyond the baby shower. Nobody sees that part, right? We just see maybe the family photo, fast forward, you know, 6 months after you've gotten the makeover and you're a little more put together. But that whole, you know, biopsychosocial process in between is really, really messy. And I think having any outlet to start to process that and play with that concept of imperfection and look at it a little bit is really helpful. So does that answer the question? I know I kind of took it on a tangent.
No, absolutely. And then I guess I'll have you touch on this if you feel like it's relevant, but people who may have gone through any kind of birth trauma or anything that feels like they have to work through their expectations that didn't quite follow through in their birth plan. Is that something that you feel like has been really effective in them kind of working with you and going through this process?
100%. I wish it was somehow built in our society that like there was a birth processing session that was like covered by insurance at the hospital right away. Something like that. How amazing would that be? Because absolutely. I mean, this may not be a popular opinion, but I kind of believe every birth is traumatic to some extent, in that it's an overwhelming bodily experience that's sort of this, it's this rupture repair, it's this huge event for your body, and really what trauma is, and you know, maybe small t trauma, not the big traumatic event, but it's an experience that is outside of our understanding, where we feel somewhat out of control. And that's kind of what birth can be, right? I mean, I have a beautiful doula who basically told me, expect something a little bit crazy in every birth, because that's just how it is. So I think, first of all, managing expectations around that, but then also having a space to actually just look at, you know, what happened? How did I feel in the moment? If you have somebody to process with, the doula, you know, the OB, it's fascinating because there's always some kind of different narrative. My OB described my birth very differently than I remember it. I even had a nurse be like, oh, just for my second, 3 pushes and he was out. And I was like, what? That is not how I remember that. Like, boom, you know what I mean? So there's this inside outside sort of disconnect that happens because at the time, the birthing person is so overwhelmed with bodily sensation, and we tend to be in that fight or flight freeze response. So yes, any space to sort of look at that, process it, whatever comes out. I mean, that would be a purely, I wouldn't even assign a directive to that. I might even just provide some kind of container. You know, art therapists really like to use mandalas. It comes from the Sanskrit word circle. And it's just this idea of wholeness. There's something womb-like about working within a containing circle. It's very calming. So maybe this would happen within a mandala so that whatever comes up, you know, just process maybe your first moments. It could be, maybe it would be something like before, during, after the birth, you know, and maybe it would split the mandala up into 3 segments, something like that, just as a way to kind of give it a form and a bit of a container so it doesn't float off the page. And then just give space for that. And that is a place where memories can come up and maybe felt sense. Maybe, you know, they'll actually feel a cramp in that moment, or often emotions come up. I mean, I don't know any birthing person that can talk about their birth early postpartum without getting really emotional, just because it is such an enormously intense physiological experience. So yes, I think birth processing is enormously powerful, whether it's verbal or with the added component of actually allowing some kind of externalization and something to look at. I think they both can be equally valuable. I do think in the case of trauma, having that tangible object to just kind of work with and make sense of and outside of your body is especially helpful, because if it really was a big traumatic event where, you know, the baby's life was in danger, birthing person's life was in danger, there was some sort of lack of communication or disrespect from hospital staff. I mean, there's so many ways that can play out, unfortunately, especially in our medical system. So if there was a birth trauma, I think having any way to start to make meaning and sense of it and begin to process in stages is part of the healing. And I, you know, my practice is trauma informed, and there's no, you know, there are a lot of trauma treatments out there now that are very, you know, 6 sessions and boom. And like, that's amazing if it's evidence-based and it can work. I won't name what any of those are. That's amazing. But I really believe in the process and the ability to kind of honor the stop and the start and the readiness of the person. And, you know, I've had folks who take 6 months to finally get to it. And then it's a little bit anticlimactic because they're just like, oh, well, we worked around it for so long that actually this doesn't even feel like such a thing anymore. Like I've been able to kind of diffuse it, you know? So it's, it comes in many shapes and sizes, but I think, again, just having it externalized outside of oneself to be able to look at and then make meaning from, that's really the therapeutic element of it.
Yeah. And what I love about everything that you're telling me is that it's very subjective to the person. So there's no cookie cutter approach to this. There's no like, they're going to go through this process and it's going to look very much like this. There's maybe some concepts that are similar to the different people that you work with, but I love that. I mean, just doing art myself, I just know how innately fluid and random at times, but structured at others. And I think it's the best way that I like to think of it is that there were no rules. And so I think that helps people, because in a kind of environment of birth where there's can be so much structure, but there's so much variety, and you might have gone through, you know, a birth where the plan just went out the door and expectations just needed to go out the door. It's kind of similar when it comes to art, where you go in with an open mind and you can kind of fill in all the little holes with just your mind and your thoughts and your feelings and how that ends up getting expressed. And I know that for listeners that sounds abstract, but again, like you said, it's supposed to be abstract.
That's
and
the point. Yeah.
It's supposed to kind of not make sense talking about it because it's a very experiential kind of physical thing. But I'd love to tie in how creative resilience fits into this picture. I know we've touched on this a couple of times already, but how do you incorporate the concept of resilience into the work that you do?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned a couple things about, first of all, abstract. That's all abstract, and that can be kind of inherently frustrating because people really like concrete, tangible, deliverable, right? But I think as a whole, again, getting more comfortable with the gray and the abstract is really a life skill, and that is also where creative resilience comes in. It's a little bit like burnout, where it's sort of a pseudo clinical term. There's no one definition, but I love it because, as you know, I really like the gray, doesn't fit in the box stuff. But really the concept is about taking a traumatic experience or a so-called negative experience, an overwhelming experience, and being able to find positive solutions and turn it into an opportunity for growth. That's really what it is. So, there's so many pieces to that. There's a self-compassion piece, which inherently comes up when, you're learning how to be kind to yourself during an art making practice and stop judging it and stop expecting and labeling. I think that's a huge part of creative resilience. And then there is the creative problem solving. You're constantly figuring out, okay, what material is going to work best here? Oh, it's dripping off the page. Okay, what can I use to kind of round that out? And that's not exactly how I wanted it to look. That problem solving translates also into the type of problem solving skills we have to make in everyday life. And we just don't really create a space to hone in on it in the same way, especially in a safe, low stakes environment, which is really just you and your art medium, and maybe the art therapist, just a way to honor the fact that we are constantly making these decisions all the time. And that's also why we're really burnt out or sometimes cut off, because we're a bit overloaded and satiated with all of that input. So it's the creative problem solving, it's the self-compassion. And again, it's this reframing. That part is huge. And I think that art therapy especially just really allows us to see things from different angles, different perspectives, whether it's between you and me and you hold it up and I see something completely different. Or group art therapy is amazing because you get this feedback from other people. We always make it non-judgmental. I try to stay away from, I really love that, even though that's supportive. It's not really about that. It's more like, what does that trigger in you, or what do you associate with that? And other people's associations can be really illuminating and just shed this whole other perspective and then change the narrative around it. And that's really what it is. It's finding adaptive ways to make meaning and reframe so that it feels more manageable to you. And it's these skills that we're kind of inherently practicing and cultivating in every single session. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's sort of the creative resilience process.
I love that. This is actually like hitting like the opposite. So I work so much in science and medicine, and with my patients, there's we work. I mean, of course, there's a lot of gray, of course, in any treatment session of any kind, but it's still very methodological in certain aspects. So this conversation is just like kicking in this fun, the dancer and artist in me, and inspiring me. And I'm sure that people who may not necessarily even have a background in doing it, everyone has this kind of childish, playful piece in them. And this art therapy is really helping you draw that out, because yes, the world is very structured and there's a lot of rights and wrongs and rules and things like that. But when it comes to processing your own emotions and working through things that are going on in your own life, in your own head, and especially when it comes to the birth space, it's important to try not to think of it that way sometimes. And that can be helpful, can be frustrating, but it can be helpful in actually processing a lot of this. So I really, really love this work. And I actually have gained a lot more knowledge myself. And I hope the audience has also learned a bit more about what art therapy really is and how that they can apply it in their own situations. Or if you're somewhere in the reproductive journey, whether you're a partner, whether you're somebody who knows somebody who is in the process of, pregnancy or postpartum journey, that there's so many modalities that people can use to really process. I don't want to use the word process because that's part of it. Processing is part of it, but experiencing and living to the best of your capacity in the ways that makes you feel more whole Again, not necessarily assigning a positive, negative, that's not the point of it, but just feeling yourself and feeling comfortable in your thoughts, your experiences, your emotions. And I think that this is such a cool modality that I guess, you know, people might be using in their own ways and in their own, you know, in their own environments, but doodling or doing things like that. But there's also people like Sharon who can, in a bit more of an evidence-based approach, bring in expertise from therapy and bring in expertise from different fields and really pull everything together to help you feel more confident and feel more whole in your own life. So I love all of this, Sharon. And how do people get to access you, get to learn a bit more about the work that you do, and potentially get to work with you as well?
Thank you. I appreciate all of your words. I have a website. It is www.cocreatearttherapy.com. That's all one word. I'm also on Instagram, Co-Create Art Therapy, Facebook, the same, LinkedIn, the same. My website has a little contact form where it automatically goes to my email. You can also email me directly, Sharon at cocreatearttherapy.com. But yeah, you can find me. I try to be active on there and just sort of spread awareness. And also I do some workshops sometimes. So I do some virtual events. I love to do the burnout creative resilience events because I find that there are just, it's always necessary. I think everybody can always use a little self-care, art making, mindful moment. And I do hope to be starting groups soon when my schedule kind of comes to form a little bit more. I will be offering some virtual groups, maybe for pregnancy and postpartum. I'm still seeing what that looks like.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Great.
Thank you.
I'm going to drop all of that on the show links for people, the Instagram handle and the website, so that you can access Sharon and ask questions, get in touch. If anything today resonated with you, I highly encourage that. As you can tell, Sharon is lovely, warm, and wonderful. So, you know, you'll be in great hands. Or if you think that somebody in your life could benefit from some of this work too, you never know who you're going to help. So share this link, spread the word, and hope everyone has an amazing rest of their weeks.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.